Welcome to the debate. Imagine sitting in a salon chair for 4 straight days,
Sounds grueling already.
right? Handing over $3,000 and then realizing you really only paid for the foundation of your aesthetic. Today, we're looking at the unglamorous mathematical reality behind one of the most sought-after hairstyles today, microlocks.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this and thinking, $3,000 for a hairstyle is completely absurd, you certainly aren't alone. I mean, that sticker shock is exactly what drives clients to demand the impossible from their stylists.
Absolutely. We all want that effortlessly beautiful result without acknowledging the sheer infrastructure required to build it. And that tension is exactly what we are examining today, drawn straight from our source material.
It's a huge disconnect.
It really is. It's the profound gap between what clients desire aesthetically and the practical economic realities of this highly specialized service. So the core question we're tackling is whether the installation and maintenance of microlocks require a strict, unyielding adherence to high costs and rigid scheduling.
Or if there's, actual structural room for financial flexibility.
Exactly. I'll be arguing that microlocks are a premium, intensely labor-driven investment. They demand uncompromising, realistic service expectations when it comes to the financial cost and the strict time commitments. There is just no room for corner cutting without compromising the entire integrity of the work.
Well, and I will be taking the opposing view. I absolutely acknowledge the intense labor involved. I mean, no one is denying the effort of the stylist here, but I argue that by deeply understanding the specific variables at play, there are viable budget alternatives. We don't have to entirely sacrifice the client's goals just because the baseline demands are high.
All right, let's lay out the stark reality presented in the material to ground this. We have a highly specific, mathematically punishing scenario that perfectly illustrates this disconnect.
The one with the 16 inches of hair?
Yes, exactly. A client arrives with 16 inches of high-density hair. They request the absolute smallest locks on the standard size chart, which is the 1/4 size.
Okay.
And here's the kicker. They expect the entire installation to be completed in a single day, and they present a total budget of $600.
Which mathematically is just a complete fantasy.
Right. It's a total fantasy. The reality of interlocking 16 inches of dense hair at that 1/4 size is that it's going to take 3 to 4 full days.
Yeah, minimum.
Minimum. The stylist has to block their entire professional schedule for this one individual. So the true cost firmly sits between $2,800 and $3,000. And as the material notes, real pros know it actually goes upward from there.
It's a massive investment.
It is. So establishing these uncompromising, realistic expectations isn't just some stylistic preference. It's really the only valid approach to protecting the professional's livelihood.
Look, I understand the shock of those numbers. If someone hands you a quote for $3,000 when you expected $600, your instinct is to run out the door. But I want to offer a framework for exploring budget alternatives based on those exact same variables.
Okay, I'm listening.
The sticker shock shouldn't just shut down the conversation. Clients actually have structural alternatives. If you understand the equation, you can change the inputs.
Change the inputs how?
Well, clients can adjust the initial parameters by opting for larger locks on the size chart. Or, they can choose to start their lock journey with significantly shorter hair to lower the labor cost. The reality doesn't have to be an immovable wall. It can be negotiated.
But let's look at why that price is what it is. Because I think people hear $3,000 and assume it's like arbitrary inflation or some luxury tax. Let's break down the actual hourly rate here.
Sure, let's do the math.
If a stylist blocks off 4, let's say 8-hour days, that is 32 hours of continuous, grueling manual labor. At $3,000, we are talking about roughly $90 an hour.
Right.
And that's before taxes, salon overhead, supplies, insurance.
Yeah, when you break it down to an hourly wage, it is highly reasonable for specialized labor. I agree with that.
Exactly. And the labor itself is what I really want to highlight. Because the how of interlocking explains the cost. This isn't just twisting the hair with some gel.
No, it's a highly technical process.
Interlocking is a physical mechanism where a tool is used to pull the end of the hair through the root. creating a tight, multi-directional knot matrix. The stylist has to pass that tool through the hair repeatedly, working down the entire 16-inch shaft.
Which takes forever.
Yes. Now do that for 500 to 1,000 individual locks. It requires a staggering amount of hand stamina. Asking someone to do that for $600 means asking a highly trained professional to work for, well, less than minimum wage.
I completely agree with your breakdown of the mechanics. Where we diverge is how we respond to that reality. You were treating that 16-inch, 1/4 size scenario as a fixed point, like it's written in stone.
Because for the client, it usually is.
But it doesn't have to be. This source material implicitly provides a roadmap for budget alternatives. Length, density, and that tiny sizing, those are the multipliers in your equation. If a client only has $600, they don't have to abandon the idea of Microlocs altogether. They just have to turn the dials on the dashboard.
Turn the dials. I mean, practically speaking, what does that look like in the salon chair?
It's surface area math. If a client moves up from a 1/4 size to something larger, say a 1/2-inch micro size, the number of individual locks decreases dramatically.
Okay, sure, you have fewer locks.
Right. You go from having to create 800 locks down to maybe 350. The labor time drops by half, and the cost falls in tandem. Alternatively, they can just cut their hair.
Start shorter.
Exactly. Starting with 4 inches of hair instead of 16 removes hours and hours of that repetitive tool passing you just described. The variables are completely within the client's control if they are willing to compromise.
I see the logic there, I really do. But I think you are ignoring the explicit psychological realities of the client described in the text. The material points out that clients specifically demand, and I quote, they want them as small as physically possible and as full as physically possible.
Right, they want the volume.
Yes, their aesthetic desires fundamentally reject your proposed budget alternatives. The entire microaesthetic is based on volume and tininess. They don't want the larger locks. If the client refuses to turn those dials, the stylist has no choice but to enforce the uncompromising financial reality.
This is a process of education. Clients ask for the impossible because they don't understand the mechanics you just explained. I mean, once they do, many are perfectly willing to adjust.
I'm not so sure about that. The misconception that Microlocs are easy, low maintenance, and cheap stems from a deep refusal to align aesthetic ambition with economic reality. And honestly, turning those dials during the initial install is only half the battle.
You're talking about the ongoing costs now.
Exactly. Even if you negotiate the upfront cost down by cutting your hair, the real financial cliff that clients fall off isn't the first appointment at all. It's the retie schedule.
Yes, the reties.
And this is where the strict rules are even more vital. The math here gets incredibly unforgiving. I champion the strict 4 to 6 week retie schedule as a non-negotiable rule.
I think non-negotiable is a bit harsh.
Let me explain why it isn't. Look at the data provided. Clients expect a maintenance bill of $100 to $150 for a session that could take 5 hours. That expectation is already completely divorced from reality.
Well, true.
But it becomes catastrophic if the client decides to push their appointment from 4 weeks to 6 or from 6 to 8 weeks just to save a little money.
You call it catastrophic, but I call it a valid, structurally supported long-term budget alternative. The source material explicitly concedes that the 4 to 6 week rule is not forever.
Wait, really? How so?
It states clearly that once locks start to mature, clients can stretch that maintenance to 6, 8, or even a maximum of 10 weeks.
10 weeks for Microlocs?
Yes. If a client is trying to manage the long-term financial burden of this hairstyle, extending the time between professional reties by a month effectively halves their yearly maintenance costs.
Walk me through that, though. How does the lock maturing actually give the client more runway? The root is still growing out of the scalp at the exact same speed, right? Roughly half an inch a month.
Correct.
So why does the maturity of the bottom of the hair buy you an extra month of ignoring the new growth at the root?
It's a great question, and it comes down to the structural changes in the hair shaft itself over time. When locks are first installed, they're just matrices of knots. They aren't fully solid.
Right.
Over the first year, as the hair naturally sheds, because humans shed, 50 to 100 strands a day, those shed hairs get trapped inside the lock. They tangle internally and form a dense, solid core. That's what maturation is.
The lock hardens into a cylinder?
Exactly. Once that solid cylinder is fully formed right up to the base of the scalp, it acts as an anchor. The new growth that comes out of the scalp has a clearly defined channel it belongs to.
Okay, I follow.
Because the foundational structure is so solid, the new growth is slightly less prone to immediately unraveling or wandering off to marry a neighboring lock. The material acknowledges this. This structural integrity allows for a longer runway between sessions. A 10-week stretch isn't negligence if the lock structure is fully mature. It is an adaptation to the new behavior of the hair.
I understand the theory of the anchor, but let me explain why that fails in practice using a different analogy. Think of microlocs like weaving a microscopic tapestry directly on your scalp.
Okay, an artistic approach.
If you adhere to a 4-week schedule, the stylist is just tightening up a 1/4 inch of new thread. It's clean, it's organized. But if you wait 10 weeks to save money,
The threads get a bit messy.
more than a bit messy. Those newly grown threads haven't just grown longer, they have begun to independently curl, fuse, and knot with the threads of the lock sitting right next to them.
Yeah, you're talking about marrying at the root.
Exactly. The stylist isn't just weaving anymore. They are untangling a microscopic shipwreck before they can even begin the actual retie process. They have to carefully pop apart hundreds of individual locks that have fused together at the scalp.
I mean, yes, it requires more prep.
You might keep a few $100s in your pocket this month by skipping an appointment, but the labor compounding makes the inevitable 10-week appointment a grueling, expensive ordeal for everyone. You aren't actually saving money. You are just deferring a massive labor cost that will hit you all at once. The fantasy of a stylist who can effortlessly retie 5,000 severely overgrown locks in 20 minutes is just that, a fantasy.
I see why you think that, but I just don't buy that it's universally a disaster. Let me push back here. Is an 8 or 10-week retie going to take longer than a standard 2-hour session? Absolutely. It might take 4 or 5 hours.
Which is miserable.
But paying for one 4-hour session every 10 weeks is still often more economically feasible for a client than paying for a 2-hour session every 4 weeks. It's about cash flow. The material specifically validates that timeline for mature locks. If the stylist charges fairly for their time, they are compensated for the extra detangling, and the client manages their monthly cash flow better.
But cash flow at the expense of the stylist's physical stamina is a terrible trade-off. When a client brings an inch or more of tangled new growth on a tiny 1/4 size lock, the stylist's hands take the brunt of that deferred maintenance.
Well,
The tension required to separate that microscopic shipwreck causes extreme hand fatigue, which actually leads directly into the real mechanism designed to prevent all of this friction. If the install is this complex and the maintenance is this heavily debated, how do clients not ruin their hair or their wallets?
They have to go through the consultation, and I think this is where we completely converge on importance, even if we view its functions slightly differently.
I would hope we converge here, because without it, the whole system just collapses. Having established how wildly divergent the client's aesthetic fantasy is from the mathematical reality of the chair, the consultation is where this information is forcefully transmitted.
Forcefully?
Yes, I frame the consultation fundamentally as a rigorous educational interview. It is a necessary, almost defensive space for the stylist to enforce professional boundaries.
Defensive? That sounds a little hostile.
It's self-preservation. The stylist has to protect their schedule and their reputation. This is where the stylist must clearly outline the at-home care, predict the mature lock sizes, and actively shatter what the material calls the biggest misconception, that microlocks are easy, low maintenance, and cheap.
That's fair. They do need to set the record straight.
If the client comes in expecting a $600 miracle for 16 inches of high-density hair, the consultation is where the stylist brings down the hammer of reality. The material guarantees that if you skip this consultation, you will regret it. It is the fortress that protects the integrity of the service from unrealistic demands.
See, I wouldn't use the word fortress because that makes it sound adversarial, like it's a battle. I see the consultation as the ultimate financial safety net for the client.
A safety net?
Yes.
The consultation isn't just about the stylist enforcing boundaries. It's about giving the client the empirical data they need to make an informed economic choice. By breaking down the true costs, the initial $3,000, the reality of the hourly rate, the mechanics of a 5-hour maintenance session, the consultation empowers the client. They are no longer operating in the dark.
And sometimes that empowerment leads them right out the door.
Exactly. And that is a success. Sometimes the most successful outcome of that consultation is the client realizing maybe Microlocs ain't what's best for me. The material frames this perfectly. The stylist is quoted saying, "I even love that still because I just saved you money. I just saved you a headache."
That's a good point.
Deciding to walk away with your checkbook or debit card intact is framed as a mutual victory.
I agree that opting out is a highly valid conclusion. But I want to point out that it only happens if the stylist refuses to compromise on their standards during that meeting. If the stylist is desperate for a booking and says, well, I can try to do it for $800 in a day, the client walks into a trap of poor workmanship.
That's a very fair point. The honesty of the stylist is the linchpin, but it's also the space where the client can safely test their budget alternatives. They can sit in the chair and say, okay, if I can only afford $600 right now, what can I get?
And that's where your dials come in.
Exactly. The stylist can explain those dials we talked about earlier. We can do it for $600, but we have to start with 3 inches of hair and the locks have to be a ½ inch thick. If the answer doesn't align with their aesthetic desires, they leave safely. It saves both parties from future resentment. The consultation is the intersection of economics and aesthetic desire, where the hidden variables are finally laid out on the table.
It forces a necessary confrontation between what we want and what it actually takes to build it. Let's summarize where this leaves our respective positions, because I think we've mapped out the boundaries of this quite well.
Go ahead.
I maintain my position that treating Microlocs as a high-end, intensely labor-driven investment is the only sustainable approach. We walk through the physical mechanics of interlocking today. The math is simply inescapable. 16 inches of hair, 1/4 size locks, high density. These inputs demand days of precise, repetitive manual labor and thousands of dollars.
Right.
Approaching this service with strict financial adherence and uncompromising scheduling isn't just about protecting a luxury price tag. It's the only way to respect the physical reality of the work and the professional's health. Treating it as anything less than a premium commitment leads directly to a compromised foundational structure, and that deep regret warned about in the material.
In my summary remains that while the baseline demands are undeniably high, a rigid, unyielding approach isn't the only path forward. By deeply analyzing the variables like length, density, size, and the internal maturation of the lock itself, we reveal clear budget alternatives and scheduling flexibility.
If they're willing to compromise.
Yes, but clients are empowered to navigate this process if they understand that they can adjust their parameters. They can turn the dials. They can choose larger locks, start with shorter hair, or capitalize on the extended 8 to 10-week maintenance schedules available to fully mature locks without completely abandoning their aesthetic goals.
Well, we clearly have an ongoing disagreement regarding that specific maintenance timeline. I still view stretching a retie schedule to 10 weeks on micro-sized locks as a recipe for a microscopic shipwreck. The compounding labor required to untangle fused roots makes it an inevitable frustration, rather than a wise cash flow strategy.
And I maintain that the material specifically validates that timeline for mature locks because of the structural anchor they provide, making it a functional reality, not just a negligent fantasy. However, I think we have found absolute convergence on the fact that the initial salon consultation is an indispensable mutual interview.
Absolutely. It is the great equalizer. It protects the client's wallet from unexpected compounding ongoing costs, and it protects the stylist's schedule from grueling, undercompensated labor, which really brings us back to where we started today. When we look at a beautiful, intricate grid of perfectly maintained Microlocs, we are looking at an aesthetic achievement that projects an illusion of effortlessness.
But beneath that effortless exterior is a highly complex foundation. I mean, it is built on thousands of deliberate, precise movements, rigid time commitments, and significant financial investment.
Precisely. The source material offers even more to explore regarding the specific techniques of multi-point interlocking, the deep nuances of the sizing grids, and the complex, year-long timelines of lock maturation. We leave it to you, our listeners, to draw your own conclusions about how best to navigate the intersection of these aesthetic aspirations and economic realities. Are you willing to pay the true costs of the blueprint, or is it better to walk away before the foundation is poured? Thank you for joining us on The Debate.